Hello and welcome in to this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Talk Nats. So in this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, we talk about the Nationals in the upcoming 2025 season and ultimately what to expect from this year's team. Listen, we were sold a bill of goods in the offseason. The perception, the insiders, the ones that know the Nationals best said that we were in a rebuild, but we're coming out of a rebuild and it is full go in 2025. Have we seen evidence of that yet? I mean, we have seen some pretty good moves in the infield. DeYoung, Nathaniel Lowe at first base, not to mention some acquisitions that are a bit more questionable. I'm talking starting rotation and bullpen, that this team should at least be marginally better. Is that going to be the case? And ultimately, let's talk about ownership in this episode as well. The Lerners, how fully vested are they in success in the 2025 season? Or do they still believe that success is still a ways out? They'll make comparisons to Jason Worth and how things seem to be coming together at the right time. Are the Nationals at that point right now? We'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about an addition made to the bullpen that we know there's a lot of questions. We need a closer. We need some help in the bullpen, period. They did make a somewhat recent addition. I'll talk about that. But before I get going here, I am going to talk to you about our sponsor at BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. Whether you're a seasoned fan or first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selections of odds and everything from the NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So let's dig into it. Nationals 2025. How much better will they be than last season? That is the biggest question. And I'm hoping that we're not entering into another season of letdown. We were told that we have James Wood, we have Dylan Cruz, we have Robert Hassel III, Brady House at some point, not to mention the additions of C.J. Abrams and Cade Ruiz, that it was the making of a perfect storm. But yet the moves that we saw this offseason were good moves. They weren't great moves, in my opinion. They didn't go out and sign the big, sexy names that we had hoped for. But covering the Capitals, and I saw a familiar story this past summer where they made some additions with some questionable players, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane, these kind of guys that they were recognizable names, but were they going to make the Capitals better? Well, listen, they sit atop of the Metro Division. So to bring it back to the Nationals, the moves that they made, even though they are recognizable names, are they going to make the Nationals competitors? I take a look at the moves that they made to the starting rotation in Soroka, Sims, the move that was made to the bullpen, two names that I was familiar with, but not the names that are like, mic drop, this team is in it to win it this year. Now, I would love to be wrong, and they do have a lot of young talent in the bullpen. MacKenzie Gore, DJ Herz, like I talked about, Soroka, Cade, Cavalli, Mitchell Parker. There is a lot of questions. There's a lot of balls in the air, if you will. Are the moves that were made, are they going to pay dividends? That's my hope. As a Nationals fan, I don't want to enter into another season of lackluster baseball. And I think that, you take a look at Martinez, you take a look at Rizzo, this is their year to get it done or on to the next one. I love Martinez. He's been here through the thick. He's been here through the thin. You take a look at Rizzo. Some of the moves that he has made for the Nationals are awe-inspiring. But at the end of the day, you can only go as far as ownership. And if they tie tight the purse strings, then what can you expect? Can you expect a winning product? So let's dig into it. I don't want to go into too many side tributaries in this episode. Let's dive into and let's drill down on starting pitching in this first segment here. And a little bit of question marks. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I take a look at MacKenzie Gore. Right now, as I record this, I think the centerpiece of the rotation, ranking 72nd overall in recent evaluations. Gore's got the stuff. His four-seam fastball sits comfortably at 96, and he's showing that he can pitch effectively to both sides of the plate. So if you can start off well, say MacKenzie Gore is your number one in the rotation, well, I think that's going to start the positivity going in the right direction. You take a look at last season, despite the challenges, he struck out 181 hitters in just over 166 innings. You take a look at it, still a young guy at only 25 years old. There is definitely still time for him to grow. And what it said is left-handed pitchers often take a bit longer to find their footings in the bigs. And I think that we saw MacKenzie Gore take a step forward. I think that we might see him take another step forward. And like I say, if he can be the number one guy in the rotation, again, this is just my early take on it, recording this in February, that I think MacKenzie Gore could be the number one in the rotation. I think that there is a possibility of greatness, or at least starting off on a strong foot. You take a look at it with high expectations. It's crucial for him to stay relaxed and trust his abilities. He's the guy that sometimes overthinks things a little bit too much. Don't, concentrate at the task at hand. This batter that's in front of me, getting that out, making it through the inning, making it through the start. Don't overanalyze things too much. I think that can be detrimental to him. Jake Irvin next. Let's talk about him. He is a player that showed really great outings in a couple games and then some not so great outings. So what kind of Jake Irvin are we going to see in 2025? That is a big question. Who is currently slotted in what I'm going to say is number 2 in 2024, a 4.41 ERA, 156 batters struck out in 188 innings. Huge dude, 6'6", 234. Irvin throws downhill, a heavy sinker at around 93 that can really induce ground balls. Hey, Nathaniel Lowe, DeYoung, CJ Abrams, you guys need to be dialed in, because if he is on the bump, be prepared for a lot of activity. Now, however, we still all know the importance of defense, like I said, so the infield and the position players will need to be dialed in. And you take a look at it with a shaky infield last season, it can be tough to have that strategy pay off consistently. So we will need to see the best. And I think the infield has taken a big upgrade. I'm thinking that DeYoung, I'm thinking Nathaniel Lowe are two huge pieces that not only in the field, but hopefully at the plate as well, so they can generate some offense. I think he could settle in nicely as a good option at number 2. So next, let's talk about an addition made in the offseason, Michael Soroka. Again, not the name that was like, yes, this team is that much better. We got Michael Soroka, who signed in December for a 1-year, $9 million deal. He brings veteran presence to this team, which I think is important since we don't have Corbin anymore, and it is a young pitching staff that you do need that veteran voice. And while he didn't make the analytics rankings, his experience is invaluable. After 2 years lost to a torn Achilles, he's back and showing signs of improvement. His last season with the White Sox mainly saw him in the pen, so it'll be interesting to see how he adapts to a starting role. Again, I am penciling him into the starting rotation. And I know just based on his contract, 1 year, $9 million, that it seems like the Nationals really pushed their chips in. But I think that what we saw last year, I'm talking DJ Herz, I'm talking Mitchell Parker, Cade Cavalli later in the summer, that don't etch these names in stone. Expect him to work in the low 90s, mixing pitches effectively. Next, DJ Herz. I love DJ Herz's game. He plays with a lot of enthusiasm. That is the big thing that I notice from him when he's throwing it. He's like, is that a strikeout? And if it is a strikeout, he's pumping his fists. His energy, his enthusiasm is infectious. Last season, a 4.16 ERA, striking out 106 in 90 innings. His four-seam fastball sits around 93, complemented by a plus changeup that keeps hitters guessing. we saw him use that effectively. Herz has that unique pitching style. He pitches from the third base side of the rubber and crosses over to the first base side, which can really complicate things for left-handed hitters. So I think that DJ Herz, and you take a look at how the Nationals acquired him in the first place, that it's quite something, that sometimes you can flip these players and get really great players. That's how they got DJ Herz. If he continues to develop, he could be a strong option, not just in the rotation, but also later in games. Next, let's talk about Trevor Williams competing for that fifth spot. That's at least where I have him penciled in. Some people thought that, well, they signed Soroka, that Trevor Williams is gonzo. Not the case. We'll talk about Trevor Williams. Williams had a decent run last year with solid numbers and limited starts. And there's even talk of experimenting with a 6-man rotation, is what we heard earlier. Ultimately, I think they're going to stick to 5. His analytics didn't make the latest rankings, but it'll be interesting to see how he fits in. So that's what I'm talking about. Mitchell Parker and also Shinosuke Agaswara, a guy that I think is going to surprise a lot of people in camp. He had some of the best hitters on the Nationals off balance. They spoke glowingly of Agaswara and what he was able to accomplish. So there are a lot of balls in the air. It is a fluid situation as far as pitching is concerned. Mitchell Parker, Shinosuke Agaswara, and possibly Cade Cavalli later in the season. So let's talk about the tertiary move, shall we say, specifically on Mitchell Parker and Cade Cavalli. He's shown a lot of, Mitchell Parker here first. He's shown a lot of promise as he climbed through the minors, and his stuff is starting to translate well to the bigs. Again, I was very surprised when he first came out of the gate. I'm like, who in the hell is this guy? Very surprised, at least at first. Was very dominant. Parker has been impressive, showcasing a solid mix of pitches and the ability to get strikeouts. His mechanics seem to have stabilized, and there's a huge plus as he aims to secure a spot in the rotation. Again, it's early, it's February, and everything that's been etched out is etched out in pencil. There is nothing that we know for show. If he can maintain consistency and build upon his past performances, he could carve out a significant role in this year's team. Next, other outside tertiary moves, if you will, is Cade Cavalli, the comeback kid this time last year. We were all abuzz about him. When were we going to see him? There was the Tommy John surgery. When would he join the team? Again, I think he will join the team later in the season. I'm talking midsummer or thereafter. But I don't think he will start with the Nationals right away. I think he will start in AAA. And if he plays well, then I think he will have a bigger role on this team. But I am still optimistic about Cade Cavalli from what I have seen in a smaller sample size. I think he could be a game changer. And again, Soroka for me is still a bit of a wild card. I want to believe, but I guess, looking at his numbers, they don't have me thinking like, oh my God, they got that guy. So it'll be interesting to see what the Nationals ultimately have in the tank with a lot of these different guys. I don't want to be drinking the Kool-Aid on any of these guys unless I see evidence that they are the real deal. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Lerners, the ownership of the team, and are they fully invested in this year's Nationals team? They said they were. Rizzo, they said they were going to be all in, but actions speak louder than words. In some cases, words speak stronger than words. I'll talk about the latest interview with the Lerners straight ahead. Keep it right here. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network, talking Nationals baseball as we're ramping up for preseason action. I'm excited to get baseball back going, and is this team going to be better? And what we've seen from the Lerners is there a feeling that this team is fully vested in a winning product. Recently, Mark Lerner made it clear that the Lerners are committed to the Nationals and not looking to sell the team. Ultimately, he wanted to see the interest and kind of gauge the interest. And what he said was that he didn't want another owner as part of the mix, as we know that the Lerners are by the Lerner family. And there was talk out there about Ted Leonsis and all those kind of things. And despite the fact that they have not opened up the piggy bank, in my opinion, like they did years ago, I think that they don't want to sell the team for whatever reason. And Mark Lerner in particular is optimistic. During a recent interview at the National Spring Training Complex, Mark emphasized their commitment to the team, saying, quote, "Our commitment is to continue to go forward," unquote. I guess as me as a Nationals fan, I know that they made some smaller moves, and I've heard different insiders say, hey, they might prove us wrong and blah, blah, blah. I wish they would have gone out and got a Scherzer or a Jason Worth like they did years ago. And it's great to hear that family is enthusiastic about the team's prospects, and it is in it for the long haul. Again, actions speak louder than words. They've invested so much in acquiring the franchise, and they genuinely love what they're doing here. But clarification from ownership. Now, it's interesting to note that Mark rarely speaks publicly about the team's management, so his recent comments really stand out. There were whispers about potential sales, the whole Mason debacle, but he clarified that these discussions were more about exploring options other than actively pursuing a sale. They considered selling a portion of the franchise, but ultimately decided to focus on what they already have, especially with the ongoing complexities surrounding their regional sports network, Mason. The Mason mess, run by the Orioles organization. I think that the Nationals at some point should take a page of what the Twins did, for example, where you can just buy subscription to Nats TV, Nats.tv. I think that would make it so much easier for us Nationals fans. So let's talk about the legal matters that do surround Mason. Their legal dispute with the Orioles over television rights is still in the mix. Lerner expressed optimism about reaching a resolution regarding the hefty $320 million award from the MLB panel, but he couldn't get into specifics due to the ongoing legal situation. But celebrating 20 years of Major League Baseball back in the district. As we know, this year marks an important milestone, the 20th anniversary of Major League Baseball in DC. The Lerners purchased the team for $450 million after the Expos relocated, and it's been quite a ride ever since. The high water mark, of course, in 2019, Mark reflected on the ups and downs, acknowledging the tough years from 06 to 10, but celebrating the incredible success we experienced from 2012 to 19, which includes the unforgettable World Series championship. Looking forward into his crystal ball, Mark seems hopeful about the Nats' future, especially after the recent struggles. He's learned a lot about rebuilding a team, and he aims to maintain a competitive edge with minimal roster changes year after year. So that is one of the things, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that when the Nationals acquired Jason Worth, the feeling was that the Nationals were on the cusp of greatness. What he talked about is that when the time is right, that the Nationals will do that again. So that kind of lends me to believe that he doesn't believe that the Nationals are there yet, as the Nationals did not acquire a Jason Worth-esque type player. They are dedicated to making the Nationals not a team that competes, but one that consistently thrives. And I think they have the building blocks in place. At least I think James Wood, Dylan Cruz, Robert Hassel, yada, you know who I'm talking about. But what is the missing ingredient, and what do the Lerners need to see that's going to make them all in? That is what has me a bit concerned, as I think that to a certain extent we hear the same lip service every year that the Nationals are going to be good next year. Oh, no, next year they're going to be fully in. That I do think the Nats will be better this season, but even in the Lerners, just from reading the article, I get the feeling that they don't think the Nationals are there yet, or they would have made those big expenditures. So again, cautiously optimistic about the 2025 season. Let's hope that the Nats can prove a lot of people wrong the way the Caps proved a lot of different people wrong. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about a recent addition made to the bullpen and Sims. And listen, the Nationals are looking for a closer. They were looking for help in general in the bullpen. Will he help fix what ails the bullpen for the 2025 Nats? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, talking baseball on the Believe Podcast Network, as we're getting closer and closer to preseason baseball. And it all starts there, where you can kind of gauge the team and what direction they're going in. So the Nats did a thing. They signed Lucas Sims to a 1-year major league contract. That move secures a spot for him on the opening day roster. At least on paper, of course. That is where he's penciled in to be in the bullpen and potentially kicking the tires on a closing role. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we say. Sims, who's 30 years old, is coming off a tough season, and he's looking for a comeback, but seems determined to bounce back. His attendance at practice, he is a step or two behind the rest of the players, but he mentioned, quote, "I was patient. I had a good situation in the offseason out in Arizona. I was content," unquote. He is ready to make an impact this season. That's what we're hoping for. But to accommodate this move, they had to clear some cap space, they had to clear some roster space, rather. A 40-man roster for Sims. The Nationals have placed Mason Thompson on the 60-day injured list. As we remember, Thompson underwent Tommy John last spring, so it's smart to move as the Nationals look to keep their roster more flexible. But if you're not familiar with Sims' track record, originally picked in the first round by the Braves in 2012, he's appeared in 245 big games, mostly with the Reds. And over the last 8 years, he's posted a 4.50 ERA and a whip of 1.291. But what really stands out, his ability to strike out an average of 10.4 batters per 9 innings and limit opponents to 6.9 hits per 9 innings. Sims had the best season in 23, sporting a 7-3 record with a 3.10 ERA and a 1.180 whip across 67 games. And he was solid. He struggled. He faced some challenges with the Red Sox, and the Nationals are optimistic, especially given his primary pitch, a sweeper, which he throws over 40% of the time. It's been effective, holding opponents to a 174 batting average. The bullpen. That is the thing that the Nationals needed help as we gear up for this season. We need some help in the bullpen. And he stated, quote, "Just try to throw as many strikes as you can. Just fill up the zone," unquote. That is the mentality we're looking for from him. And where is he going to slot in the bullpen? Long relief? Is it going to be a closer role? It's going to be interesting to see here. While he doesn't have extensive closing experience, just 12 career saves, he can definitely step into a setup role with the Nationals will need alongside Law and Lopez. The Nats are still assessing their closing situation. As we know, last year was Finnegan, who was huge. But what the Nationals perceived, he was looking for a lot more money, as they have not locked down a proven closer yet. Robertson, at 40 years old, remains a free agent, and the team previously non-tendered Kyle Finnegan, who was projected to command a sizable salary during arbitration. Now, the man himself, Davey Martinez, mentioned Lopez, who had 23 saves and 22 with the Orioles and Twins, as an option for closing duties. He also is showing support for 24-year-old Jose A. Ferrer. It seems like the coaching staff is keeping things flexible. Again, I wish the Nationals would have gone out and signed more of a sure thing. That is my assessment. And as we take a look around the moves that were made, I think that the Nationals are going to be that much better at the first base position with Nathaniel Lowe. I'm talking like DeYoung at third base. But I think a thing to keep an eye on at third base is Brady House, is the player of the future at third base. And one of the things that Rizzo said is he didn't want to sign players to block players that are on the rise. So despite the fact that they did sign DeYoung, I think there is a distinct possibility that they could flip him at the trade deadline when Brady House is ready to go, or sooner. I guess it depends on how he progresses. That I think that at the end of the day, that DeYoung is still kind of a stopgap measure. He has a lot of history at the shortstop position. As we know, C.J. Abrams is looking for a bounce-back season as well. So interesting storylines to follow for this year's Nationals team. Again, I wish they would have made bigger moves. I think that there are some moves that ostensibly will make this team better. But like I said, seeing is believing. I want to see steps forward from this Nationals team before, I'm thinking, hey, they're going to make it to the playoffs. And that's what we've seen the last few seasons is marginal growth. I think it's time to see more than marginal growth. What do the big guns of the future have in the tank? What is James Wood going to look like during a full season? What is Dylan Cruz going to look like for a complete season? Robert Hassel III ostensibly at some point, and Brady House. That the pieces are in play that let's see what this team has. Again, if you are to read into anything that the Lerner said, they kind of feel, I think, like this team is still a bit of a ways out, despite everything that we've heard. I really hope that the Nationals can prove a lot of people wrong, that they can actually elevate their game and be contenders this season. As I look back here on the wall here, 2019 doesn't seem like it was that long ago. I guess time goes by quicker the older that you do get, but I am cautiously optimistic about this year's team, that it is the young talent, not to mention some of the veterans that they signed, that this team will take steps forward. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. Once again, today's episode was brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Make sure to check out our friends at TalkNats.com, as they will have you guys covered the entire season. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Talk Nats podcast, and I'll talk to you again next time.